Okay, yeah, so today we're going to talk about the Toyota production system, which originally I wasn't planning to talk about, but from I think when we went over the client services module, which is the first module, there was lots of really good questions about how we implement the Toyota production system, what it really means. I am by no measure like a formal TPS trainer, so I pulled this content together. I'm familiar with it, but I'm not an expert, so I'm just putting that out there. But I think that this will give kind of the basics of it. And I mean, it is something that we use exclusively in all of our operating sites, and there's some principles to it that I think are very applicable to what all of us are doing. So there's the CPS. There's also a lot of information in here about storytelling. I think that when I've talked to groups, there's this like disconnect between the heart, where we know we're helping these survivors and they have these like really intense, really heartbreaking stories sometimes, but then like the head part of not being able to relay that in a way to funders or, you know, on social media or wherever it is. But like, how do we connect that and make the story that we're all experiencing and exposed to every day, fortunately or unfortunately, how do we like compartmentalize that and package it nicely where we're doing justice to the homeowner and also able to share what we're doing for and with them. And then outreach. And I think outreach is super important, so just that we know what our community actually needs from us. So we'll get into it. Like I said, that's the agenda, the TPS, importance of outreach, and then writing stories. Okay, gonna do a quick video. It's real quick. Let's see. Tell me, I think you should be able to hear it, but tell me if you can't.
Liz and I came down to St. Bernard in February 2006. In this community of 27,000 homes, every single house was flooded.
So we decided that we were going to start rehabbing the houses and putting them back together.
We have 33 staff members and 68 AmeriCorps members, but that's a small team compared with the great needs. And so we understand that we need partners.
Toyota is really committed to helping communities after disasters. And when we met them, it seemed like the perfect fit.
We take the Toyota production system model as it might apply to manufacturing and translate that to a new process, for example, the process of building homes. You're taking about 116 days. We should be taking something like 50 or even less. If I get a house done in a shorter amount of time, I can start on the next one, and then I can start on the next one.
It used to take us before Toyota anywhere from 12 to 18 weeks to rebuild a house, and we just did 2 test houses in 6 weeks.
All right.
Our commitment is to take this model that we've developed with Toyota and bring it to other communities.
There's a massive human impact from efficiency. The partnership with Toyota, it's going to save families' lives.
Oh, there we go. So that was a pretty old video. I don't know if you could tell, but it's a pretty old video. I really like it. I think it's still very relevant. And it, I think, summarizes the Toyota production system and SVP's relationship really well. And it really hits on what originally was noticed, this 120 days for us to rebuild. I think it was like a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, like single house. Down to 61 days. And so I think it does a good job of highlighting that. So to get into some of the nitty-gritty here. So we partnered with them. They were one of really our first partners. There was Toyota, UPS, and Walmart came along pretty quickly after the early days. But with UPS, they really shared their tracking system and their logistics system and how we do inventory, what we have in stock versus what we need to purchase, the labeling system, all of that system really came from UPS. But beyond that, we had this philosophy that having more coming in meant having more going out. And what I mean by that is just because we have more money, more volunteers, more material, more trucks, we thought that that would equate to more homeowners coming home. And after, I think it was a series of like 2 or 3 years, that was actually the opposite of what was happening. Just because they had more, they were seeing the home numbers of homes complete actually decreasing. And so they couldn't figure out why. So then at that point, Toyota, who had been a fiscal sponsor, said, you know, we have our Toyota production system, which has been part of our ethos for, you know, generations at Toyota, but we've not ever shared it outside of our doors with any nonprofits. We're very interested in sharing it and seeing if the model can hold up and adapt in construction, especially in a rebuild, disaster rebuild zone. So they said, okay, we beta tested it. We were the first group to do it with Toyota. And there were some like things that we had to fix and, you know, measure along the way. But ultimately what we found was that the construction process and the client process was very translatable to building a car, building a truck or whatever it was. There's still that production line, and there's still this moment where if something's not right, or if something is broken, or some, you know, employee notices that there's something wrong with, there's a defect with one of the cars, they still can say like, hold on, we need to pause and like fix what's wrong with it, in a similar way that I think we all have the opportunity to notice when things are, you know, not right or a little off in our own like client and construction process. And the idea here, again, is just more coming in does not equal more coming out. How do we talk about problems? How do we have, we really like hone in on this like culture of constructive discontent, which means, you know, there's going to be problems. There's going to be issues. Everything is not going to run perfectly all the time. Even, I mean, we've been doing this for 16 years and we still find like things that we can be retooling and fixing with it. But how do we all kind of come to the table really positively and constructively, noticing those problems and then not just pawning that off to another person, but also coming with solutions. You might just be like a shop worker or somebody who works on the floor, but you're really in touch with like, when you put, you know, the door on a car, you're really in touch with how that process works. And so you should and can be the one to make a suggestion of how that could be done more efficiently. And so it's this concept of everybody constructively coming to the table to figure out better ways to be more efficient. So it's this concept of efficiency and just making sure we're not really settling for just because it was always done that way means we continue to have to do it that way. And I think in disaster recovery, I mean, I'm 8.5 years into my disaster recovery experience, and I know that's like a drop in the bucket comparatively to probably a lot of you on the call and elsewhere. But there is this, like, I mean, I see it all the time, this idea of, well, this is how it's always been done, and so this is just how we're going to keep doing it. And that could show up in a whole bunch of different ways, with contractors, with vetting clients, with how we work together even. But I think it's really important for us to pause and look at things like a little bit objectively and creatively and see like, oh, well, what if we're all working differently? Can we work together to solve this other problem that may not have actually been a noticeable problem before, but we just recognize that we can be more efficient if we work together on it. So I think what I really like about Toyota is it pushes the boundaries of what we've done and what we can be doing. So go on to the next one. So that kind of starts with and really centers around this visualization process. I think, I mean, for myself, I'm a super visual person and things get lost in spreadsheets. It's been hard, especially during COVID, to go for me from having all of these whiteboards, and I'll get into them in a minute, but We literally have a whiteboard for everything, huge whiteboards that take up, 20 feet across, huge whiteboards. And they will literally track everything from the first time a homeowner, the first contact with a homeowner through like the sign off for that project. And what that does is it provides everybody who walks into the office every day to see where somebody's at in the process. If you put a little red dot or like a green, star or whatever, it shows if you're ahead or behind, and you just quickly know where everybody is. There's none of this like hiding it in spreadsheets or on a tracker somewhere that's a little bit more private and hidden. This way, everybody sees everything all the time, and it quickly bubbles up problems. And with that, you want to always be tying it to goals. So we'll talk a little bit more about it. Also, hold on a second. I'm gonna just quickly do something here. Sorry. Okay, yeah. Hold on one second. Sorry. Yeah, okay, much better. So tying it to the goals. So not only that, we want to complete 50 houses in a year, but the little pieces of that. How many clients do we want to be approving every week? How many contractors do we want to have onboarded, know that they're licensed and insured, monthly? Like, do we want to have 3 subs that are in our bucket that we can call on any day, anytime? That's a smaller goal, but if you only have 1 sub in your pool, that could make a huge difference, right? So it's not just this concept of like annual goals or like big picture goals, but it's really breaking things down into, I think, a bit more bite size so that you can understand if you're like ahead or behind and where kind of those disconnects might exist. The length of time that we talk to clients and how we measure, an application, say. So we have Miss Smith that comes in on January 1st. We're talking to Miss Smith for the whole month of January. We're going out to her house. We're getting documents together. Maybe she's a senior and doesn't know where a lot of the documents are. And so we have to like really pull to get a lot of this together. And now we come into like February and March, and Miss Smith's project is still not approved because we're trying to be really sensitive and empathetic to her situation. But then that amount of time that this caseworker or DCM or whoever has now spent with her takes away from like Miss Jones and Miss Lee because she spent so much time with her. So how do we balance the human and like an empathetic approach to working with clients while also recognizing that we need to be efficient? And I'm not saying that it means we have to be a business, because we're nonprofits. We're doing this because of all our own individual reasons, but we do need to be efficient for our partners, for our funders, for the clients that we serve, certainly, and for our own team and like morale. So it might not be the best use of our time to spend 3 months getting Miss Smith through the process. There might be, maybe she goes to a community center and there's a person at that community center that could be helping her collect all of these documents. And then the DCM or caseworker could go and just work with that person quicker. So there's workarounds for, the balance of the empathetic approach to working with clients versus, okay, we need to be efficient. We have to keep things moving all the time. And then within that, let's set like a reasonable amount of time that we should be, and I'm just using this as an example, but that we should be approving a client. So realistically, how long should it take Miss Smith to go from that first contact to an approvable application? At SBP, we say 14 business days. And then that might sound like really aggressive, but at this point, I mean, we have a very clear, specific application. There's a list of documents that we collect and require. We can help get 25% of those documents. And the other portion of it, we know how like very specifically to guide clients to get those documents. If you don't have a very clear application, if you don't have a very clear list of documents that are required, that's all going to extend your 14 days. And I'm not saying none of this is saying that you have to follow like SBP's guidelines. Like truly, this is just meant for you to adopt like what's going to work for you all. But picking an amount of, maybe it's a month, maybe you pick a month. Okay, from start to finish with this client application, 30 days. And that's fine. And then we just track, okay, is Miss Smith's application in within the month? No, it's been 2 months. Why has it taken 2 months? And then you go back to it. And again, it encourages that moment of constructive discontent for everybody to come around the table and say, why has it taken 2 months for Miss Smith? Without finger pointing, without like getting like really into it and nasty. It can just be, well, this happened. Maybe she was in a hospital for 3 weeks. Okay, well, that's like clearly like a one-off situation. Or maybe it was, I couldn't get a hold of her. I was emailing her and calling her, house phone, but couldn't get a hold. Well, okay, did you try like going there in person? Did you try sending a letter? Did you talk to any of the other people that she works with at the community center? No. Like, okay, then that needs to happen every time. Let's make sure that moving forward, we remove that obstacle. And that's waste. I mean, that's just waste of time. You've now waited 45 days because you didn't want to go in person, send a letter, talk to other people who work with Miss Smith. So in the future, do those things, and then maybe we can still get people through it in 30 days. So it's that type of like pausing when you have an issue, looking at it objectively, and then setting new, like tiny little new metrics along the way every time to like right size and correct it. One of the Toyota like concepts is called MUDA, M-U-D-A, and it means waste. And so waste can be anything. It can be money, it can be resources, but it can also be time. And like more often than not, it is time that we're wasting. We're not just wasting our time and our staff's time, but more importantly, we're wasting the time of the like disaster survivors we serve. And we're doing like an injustice to Miss Smith by letting it go 45 days. If we really were to push it, get it to 30 days, like maybe it would be a little uncomfortable, but then after 30 days, we could approve that application and get her started the next week, instead of still be talking to her at week like 4 and 5. And that's what we're here for. We're here to like guide the homeowner through the process, always using like an empathetic and I think trauma-informed approach is really important, but they're in the thick of it. And it's our job to stay separate from that a bit and like help guide them so that whether we're going to work with them or have to deny them or refer them out, we're able to provide those services for them. And the visuals like really help that, especially if you're, if you have a funder come into the office and you can show them this. I'll tell you for sure, like when I've done tours of our New York office with the whiteboards everywhere, that was like a big selling point. People were like, oh, what's this? What does this red dot mean? And then you can explain it. And you want the red dots. Like you want to show that everything's not perfect. We're working on it. This is how we're going to fix it. It's fine. I mean, that just shows that you have this like culture of transparency. And I think that's really important. We're all just doing our best here. And so we can talk about that openly and honestly and with solutions in mind. So I'm a big fan of the whiteboards. I was like devastated to lose the whiteboard system when we had COVID. And now I'm just in my apartment and definitely don't have a whiteboard up in my, like decoratively in my apartment, but it would be, I think, great if I could be in an office to have those again. So I'll pause on that one, because that was a bit, and then see if there's any questions. Any questions so far?
I have a question. Shocker. I have 2 questions. One, did Toyota partner, and do they partner with other organizations like as a gratis thing, or is it like something that you have to invest in the advice that they give?
That's a good question. I I know that, I mean, I know we were the first ones to partner with them, and now part of our mandate is that we share the way more officially and formally, but that we share this with other partners. And I think if that was something you were interested in, either, I mean, somebody at SBP would be able to provide that, or we would connect you with Toyota, or you could connect with Toyota on your own. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they're at a point now where they're charging for the services. I would imagine they are.
It
but
seems like
maybe
it'd be
not.
so time intensive for them to
Yeah,
do it, you know.
yeah, correct. Because I remember they came to New Orleans and they spent like a week and a half with us in New Orleans. And they went through like I mean, and this was only maybe 5 or 6 years ago, because we had worked with them 16 years ago, gotten it to a place, and then we had like tripled in size, and we needed to train our people. And so they came to New Orleans. They did come to New York and New Jersey. And so I got to go to one of those trainings, but it's a long, like intensive training. And so that's why I say, like, this is like my tidbits that I think are helpful, but there's so much more to it. So I don't know the answer to that, but I can surely find out. And I do know that part of our like requirement is to more formally share this with partners. This is not that, but yeah.
And then 2 more questions. One is, do you apply this at SBP to more than just the construction element, like operations element of your organization? Do you apply it to like HR and other, like, how is it integrated in other departments?
It's in literally every department. I mean, I
Okay.
have it. Like, I have a visual that looks exactly like these boards for share. It's just a spreadsheet because obviously I'm not in an office. But yeah, it's applied to HR. We all, at the beginning of the year, we have our like regular goals, but then it all breaks down into like key performance indicators that are those like smaller goals that I mentioned. And we have this phrase, it's called pulling your and on, which means like when something is noticeably broken that's coming your way or like in the process, you have the ability to like stop everything, call whoever you need to call, your supervisor, whatever, and say like, I need help, like something's wrong here. But that like, you know, mission is 100% everywhere at SBP.
Okay, and the last question is, what other organizations have like really integrated this into their culture the way you have in disaster? You know?
I do not know. These are great questions. I want to say Rebuilding Together might have a partnership with Toyota.
Yeah, actually, I met with them. I think they might. That sounds
Yeah.
familiar.
Yeah, I think they might. Habitat might. Those are the only 2 that are coming to mind. But
Okay.
it does not always have to be like big, you know, national organizations either. I know they do provide it for smaller organizations too. And mostly they do this for profits. So they had always been doing it for the for-profit industry or sector for, you know, years and years, but we were just the first nonprofit that they tried to transfer it to.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, these are great questions. Thank you. Other questions?
Just quickly, Toy.
Okay.
I always have questions too. I'm just like very interested in the actual like whiteboard itself. Like, did y'all create those grids? Is that a special product you ordered? Like, do you know? And if you don't,
I do know a bit of the history of the whiteboards. That was 100% Toyota. I think before we probably had like your basic whiteboards that like kind of went through everything, but I mean, it's like extra thin, extra fine electrical tape. And there's like this whole crazy setup that you can do to get the grids like that, but it's not painted on there. It's literally electric tape that somebody painstakingly puts on there to like grid it out. And then the overlay of like, because this one is, I think, a construction one. You can kind of see at the top, it says like DR, FR, insulate, DW, like M. All of those are all each like obviously for like demolition, framing, probably insulation, drywall, mudding, you know, so and so on. But in each of those phases, somewhere on here is the amount of days it's supposed to take for that per phase. And that's set by obviously like a construction professional saying, ideally, in a perfect world, you have the best volunteers. It should only take them, say, 4 days to mud this 800 square foot house. And then, okay, it's 4 days. Now that tracks two things. That tracks how many days is it actually taking. It should be taking 4 versus, but also why are we not utilizing volunteers and making them like the quote, like best volunteers they can be with every single group of volunteers. We all know, I mean, I've worked with volunteers for a long time before SBP, and they're not always like the best. They're not always the most productive. They're not always the most efficient. It's like 50-50, but we, like, I think, have the responsibility to make those groups that are a little bit more challenging or like flaky or uninterested. It's our job to guide them and make sure that they're as productive as the other like high performing groups. And so then it tracks accountability for your, we call them project leads in SBP, but the people who are on site, they're managing the volunteers. But why did you let the volunteers take 3 weeks to mud a house? Like, it really should have only taken 4 or 5 days. So it tracks then so many different things. But the actual grid itself is like a metrics of Toyota that they lent us. And then there's obviously pieces of it that you can quantify on your own.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I have better pictures of the grids. Somewhere I have better pictures of the grids.
I would love that in one of your emails you send out afterwards. That'd be so helpful.
Yeah, I have not seen a picture of it in a while, but I'm sure it exists. Let me add that to my follow-up. And I can find one, I think, for the client board too. I mean, again, like, this is not, you don't have to do it to these phases and to these amount of days, but just so you have the idea. I'll send the construction and the client process. It's harder to translate that into like share or advise or our preparedness interventions, but we still do it. Okay, cool. Other questions? Or actually, I think I'm just gonna move on. If there's other questions, we'll get them in a minute here.
I have a question.
Oh, hey, Elizabeth. Yeah, go ahead.
I put it in the chat, but maybe you can't see it. So how much are you concerned about confidentiality with what you put on the board? Do you not use names? Do you only use addresses or case numbers?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I'm trying to think. We just put names. I think we just do last names without address. But yeah, or we'll just put the street and not the like home number, but we won't put like first name, last name, full address. It's just gonna say, maybe Smith Main Street, or probably even just Main Street, but it doesn't have to say. And you can, I mean, I think it's probably more complicated for you for like any of us to do it this way, but you can also just like tag clients as provide numbers to each client. And then as long as you have a setup to track like what number corresponds to what actual client, you could put that on the board. But yeah, I mean, when funders would come through, they wouldn't be able to tell like everything about somebody's home address and information. But that's an excellent question. Okay. All right, I'm going to get into the next one. Okay, so this one's a bit heavy, but I'm going to try to go through it quicker. So this kind of just talks about how we streamline the process. There's the outcome where we're looking for the product rather than the activity. And I'll say that again, looking at the product versus the activity. Just because we're taking so much time and like spinning our wheels with Miss Smith, who's like, a senior, that doesn't actually equal production. It doesn't equal really anything. It's the products that we're really wanting to focus on. So that I think a lot of us, and I know for myself too, it's so easy to pay attention to the activity. Well, I've been calling them and I've been trying and emailing and doing all of this stuff and like I'm getting nowhere. That's not so much what we want to be focusing on. We're focusing on the outcome. So we're defining what success looks like for that stage. For that phase, for the client approval, success is approving the client every within 30 days of the initial contact. 30 days, that's it. What activity you have to do to get there doesn't really matter. Just that's the goal. And I know like some of this does sound like very, I think, formal and businessy, but I think it's important that we take that approach in some moments. Again, like with this idea of keeping everything as streamlined and efficient as possible. The next one is visualization. We talked a lot about the visualization, so I'm not going to spend too much time there. The timeline, how long should it take to complete the first draft of a recovery plan? How do we set the timelines for each component of construction? How do we set the timelines for, I haven't talked about volunteers much, but like communicating with volunteers. Volunteers might, not show up on site when we think they're going to show up if nobody's communicated with them in the last like 2 weeks. Maybe they scheduled their date a month ago, but then if they've been basically ghosted, I'll use the expression ghosted, for that whole month leading up to when they were supposed to attend. And it's like, well, did anybody contact them the week or two before? No. Okay, so how do we set timelines for that too? Maybe every volunteer group needs to be contacted a week before their date so that we know that they're actually coming and we're planning for something that is going to actually happen. And again, like with what I talked about with construction process, how long should the things take? Like if we're being aggressive, if we have everything we need, capacity is not an issue, how long should roofing really take? Like if we have a great sub doing the work up there, how long should it take? Generally, I think it's like 2 to 3 days. I mean, I've seen subs do it in like a day, but I mean, it depends on obviously the roof size, but if it's supposed to only take 2 or 3 days, like barring weather, why does it take sometimes 5 or 6? And then is that really a sub that we want to be working with? Because that trickles down into so many other things. Well, we had the plumber planned, or we had planned to do the framing on the inside of the house, but I had to wait for the roofing to be done. And now we can't do it because this guy on the roof is like, messing around and not getting it done when he's supposed to be able to get it done. And so now it backs up everything. So really looking at everything objectively and aggressively and saying with a construction person or with, a client person who knows how long each phase should take and setting those metrics for each one. And then capacities. How many intakes can we really do in a week? If you only have, like 3 part-time or 3 volunteer caseworkers or DCMs working with you and they're volunteers, realistically, they're not going to be able to like pump through a ton of clients every week, every month, because they're volunteers, which is fine, or they're part-time. And so then when you might have 20 or 30 volunteers and you have the construction capacity, but you're not getting the clients approved, well, maybe the thing to do there is, not completely cut out your volunteer caseworkers, but maybe just hire 1 or 2 of them. And then you have, you'll have less, but they'll be full-time, more accountable, and they can like properly get clients through the intake process. So what is your capacity realistically, and how can you maybe increase it by like retooling it just slightly, especially if you're paying like 3 or 4 people part-time? Consolidate that, make it 1 or 2 people full-time, and then you have them there all week, 9 to 5. Okay, this is like a whole thing here, but what I'm saying here is it's in steps, right? Like none of this all has to happen at the same time, and it absolutely shouldn't. There's all of, like I've been saying this whole time, there's a visualization to this. So we're figuring out the problem, breaking it down, asking why. We have something called the 5 whys. So you ask why 5 times, you get to the root cause of the problem, and then figure out how to fix it, right? So you're setting a target, analyzing the root cause. So now you identified why it's happening, like developing the countermeasures. So in 4 and 5, you're figuring out how to fix that. 6, we're implementing. 7 and 8, evaluating, seeing how that goes. Okay, well, maybe it worked better when we had, 3 people because they could take different regions. So maybe instead of hiring 2 full-time staff, we actually do need 3 full-time caseworkers. Maybe we don't have the funding for it, let's go figure out. And like the actual problem is you need to go find funding for a third full-time caseworker. Okay, great. Figure that out and then standardize it. Make that a part of your like policy and procedure. Okay, so that kind of wraps up some of the Toyota work. Like I mentioned, I'm not the expert here. I can definitely find a lot of the more visual, visualizations of the boards and things that I will absolutely provide in the follow-up, but I'll try to answer any other questions that you guys have now. So let me see if there's any questions, and then I'll go on to outreach. And sorry if you did put questions in the chat, I wasn't looking at the chat before. No? Okay. I'm gonna go on. This is a shorter module. So the outreach to me is like, oh my gosh, so critical. In Joplin, Missouri, after the 2011 EF5 tornado went through there, it was a mile wide, went through the town, just insanely slow, destroying literally everything in its path. I'm from the East Coast. I wasn't familiar with tornadoes, but I did get to go out there a few times after SBP had set up an operating site out there and see it. And it was just like unimaginable, mind-blowing to me. And so I know that what we did in Joplin towards the end of the recovery there is very different than what we are able to do after hurricanes and floods in our like respective areas. But the concept of it can be used anywhere. It's like easily translated. So what they did was they set up an insane like outreach campaign that included volunteers knocking on doors, sending out letters, social media. I mean, I'll get into it, but really like blanketing the community and like making sure that every single homeowner that still had need put on a list with Rebuild Joplin was the name of the group that we were partnered with. And then we fundraised for those dollars and repaired X amount of homes. So we ended up doing 181 homes there after this, what we called Blackout the Block campaign. Again, in the whole idea of visualizing everything, they printed out an enormous, I kid you not, like 25-foot long map of Joplin, of the like impacted Joplin area. And each house had a little box and it was white. And then when they knocked on it or like communicated with that person, they literally colored it in black. And that is why they called it, it was the Blackout the Block campaign. Can't do that in some other communities. I mean, tornadoes are different. You can see it was impacted or not. But we had a similar idea for New York. When we closed New York's Hurricane Sandy operating site in Queens, we went with volunteers every day for about 2 years and knocked on literally 15,000 New Yorker doors, had all kinds of responses to knocking on strange doors in New York City. It was very interesting and a good learning experience. And then for the houses that we couldn't reach, we left flyers. We also sent postcards, little postcards to everybody, just to make sure everybody heard about us. I feel like I can say, truly, we did as much as humanly possible to get the word out that we were going to close. And we found about 400 clients doing that. And so then we took those 400 people, called them all, vetted them all. There was maybe 150 of them that were eligible that we could work with. And then we went and asked for funding from a bunch of different partners for what we thought we were going to need for those 150, provided the services. And then in August last year, we closed. And it was bittersweet, but we wouldn't have been able to do that if we had the opposite philosophy of, I mean, we had literally no money when we did this outreach campaign. We just, the philosophy of like, if we know what the community needs, we will write the story to tell funders, this is how you can make this impact. This is how you can finish like the Sandy recovery in New York City. So it's not, oh, I have no money right now. Oh, I don't think I'm going to have enough funds for the next 6 months. It's like, if you have the capacity, because I know not everybody has the capacity, but what does the community need? Like, what does your service area need from you? And if you think like long haul, we can do this, then get your data together and then go and tell that story to the funders. And you'd be surprised that once you have that super specific list, people people are really open to giving. I mean, it was like the easiest fundraising I've ever done after 2 years of outreach, but it was pretty great. So that's why I super strongly believe in outreach. Okay, so again, why do we do this? For all of the reasons I mentioned, but our goal here, like, ultimately, is just to maximize the repair services to our communities, right? We know that there's people out there. There were still people who had left after Katrina and never came back. There were homes that were still that are still impacted from Ida and Winter Storm Uri and Harvey. And in Florida, we have, I think it's Michael. Sorry, Anita, if it's not Michael. But there's still these homes out there. These families that are living in like unsanitary, unsafe conditions. And so like the goal is to make sure that none of them are left behind. And we do that in, again, like the objectives, leaving no qualified homeowner behind, letting our partners know, other DCM programs know, like saying, this is the program we have available, this is what we're trying to do. Do you know of anybody? And then collecting that information. And then, I mean, we all work with each other, but there's so many other groups that we work with. We're probably all part of a VOAD. We may all be part of different like long-term recovery groups. And those are great places to say this. I mean, I used to go to all the New York City VOAD meetings in the city and like say my spiel about, oh, New York City, like SVP, we're gonna be closing soon. Like, does anybody have any clients for us? And usually the answer was no, but it was usually no because nobody else was doing Sandy recovery in New York after like 5 years in. So we were like truly the only people left. But ask your partners, ask the other agencies that are doing it if they know of any clients that need your help, and tell them what you're trying to do. Okay, so some ideas for how we did this. So like I mentioned, VOADs, LTRGs, FEMA, like state FEMA vals. I know in Kentucky, there's a really involved state FEMA val who's been great and like really connecting everybody. There's your DCM groups. Catholic Charities has like fantastic network of DCMs, and your city and state. We worked really closely in New York with the CDBG DR program out there. They would send us clients pretty frequently when they couldn't support them. And so I called my contact there, told her what we were doing. She sent me like a huge list of people that they had to deny, but she thought like these people still need services. And so that was great. And then we called them, they were confused. She couldn't actually send me names and information, but you know, it was like the basic idea of who I needed to be outreaching to. And we were able to serve a lot of those people actually. So there's that, there's your social media, the door knocking campaign I mentioned, which is a fantastic activity for volunteers. Really, I mean, I know, especially with spring break in March and April, you get like hordes of volunteers, especially when you get the alternate spring breakers and the college kids. Oh my gosh, this is like perfect for them. You just like give them clipboards, give them some tagging or like stickers, something that says they're with your group. Get a lead person out there with them. A few blocks, this is your target area, and just let them loose, and they'll like get at it. So that's a really great use for volunteers. Community distribution lists, any community senior centers, newspaper, radio, especially the newspaper and radio for the seniors that might not have access to any other area, or to, obviously not to social media, or might not have answered the door, but you could get something cheap on like radio and newspaper, or blogs and podcasts will also sometimes help, but that's not going to really reach your like senior audience. And then my last thing with the targeted postcards, the United States Post Office actually has this very cool feature where you can type in the zip codes that you want to deliver content to, and you upload your postcard or whatever it is that you want printed, and they will like mass mail all those postcards or whatever it is to those zip codes. So it's still all very super confidential, but you're just like in huge amounts like getting content out there. And granted, you don't want it to look like spam, like you need it to look like something more important than just like marketing material from I don't know, I was literally going to say Sears, and I feel like that doesn't even exist anymore. So I don't know where my mind went, but Target is probably a better example. But you want it to look more impactful and important than just like the garbage mail that they get. So, but it's a very cool feature on United States that the United States Postal Office has for us. Let me see. I think I have a question. Oh no, somebody just signed in. Awesome. So that's pretty much it. I mean, there's not much to the outreach. I just wanted to plant the seed of the importance of it and some really simple ways of how we can all do it. But is there any questions on outreach?
Yeah, this is Greg Stevens. One question on the postal outreach program where you have Target. Is that done through, that's the U.S. Post Office, but how are they related? And how is the cost associated with that? Is it per piece or you have to buy a minimum of 5,000, 10,000? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Greg, hey, so happy to see you here. It's a good question. I think you can, and I'm not sure that I heard or maybe fully understood the question, but you can set it to whatever the limit is. You can say like, there's, I think, what do they call it? Within those zip codes, you can target specific even areas in the zip code. Like in Queens, a zip code could cover, north to south Queens, which is a huge area, and half of it wasn't affected by Sandy. And so we were able to like really draw out. I think the map has like a draw feature, and you can say like, this is the specific area, and then it figures out the addresses and the number, and then it'll ask you like, do you want to send 4,500 postcards for X, $600, and you can, whatever, do what you want with that. Is that what you're asking? Sorry.
Yes, that's a little bit more information, but thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
You can also access it online. Go to the post office and you'll be able to see the map area.
Anita, do you have experience with it?
We do. We did. We sent out 8,000 postcards, which covered our 2 counties. And then when we didn't get a response for certain areas, we saw we used Disaster Tracker, and it has a map in itself. So we were able to see the areas that we didn't impact, that we didn't get any feedback on. And we targeted that area, and that's where we accessed it online with the U.S. Post Office. And we chose that zip code and that area and targeted that again with some, another postcard style that kind of caught their eye.
Yep.
And we did get feedback from that, and we had a lot of clients that way.
Yeah, it's really great. I mean, and it's like all these little niche kind of things that I'm hoping we continue to all share with each other. But I mean, it's so easy. And actually it wasn't, I remember thinking it was a lot cheaper than I thought it was going to be. But I thought it was pretty reasonably priced for the amount of postcards that we were getting out, and that it was the post office, which is not, whatever. But yeah, so anyway, but good question. Other questions before we get into storytelling? Okay, because we have about 10 minutes left, so I don't want to take too much time here, but stories. Okay, so like I mentioned before, we're connecting the head and the heart. How do we show or how do we showcase the impact of our work without, we want to be, of course, always respectful and empathetic to the client themselves, and try to keep them really as like anonymous as possible. I think it's important when we're talking about client stories that, to the earlier question about like, Elizabeth, your question about, content and their name and address. Well, I'm not saying include name and address, like always in these stories, especially to funders. Most of the time they don't want it. You can redact like all of that information. Don't need address. You can put the street, you can just put the town. That's not the point. The point is the story. And so I think it's really important that, I just stress that. But also, I think now as disaster season is like kind of becoming a thing of the past, where disaster season is all around us, unfortunately, more often than it's not around us. It's so important that we're telling these stories to funders and to people who are going to allow us to keep doing this work over and over and over again. So let me get into this one. Okay. So right, so everybody has their own story. I think sometimes it can feel like, can't think of the word, that we take it for granted. We take the story for granted. We don't appreciate that, this story sounds a bit similar to this other story. Everybody has their own like very unique story and situation that got them to where they are. And we can effectively collect that by talking to homeowners, always in a like trauma-informed, respectful, empathetic way, to make them feel seen and heard and listened to, and ask questions that can get out some of the content and the story, and then we translate that. I'm also definitely not saying we should pry. This like approach doesn't work to everybody. I know some homeowners literally I could not ever get off the phone with them. Like I would ask one question on the phone and I would hear literally half their life story for the next hour. And that was fine. I mean, like if I had the time to do it, I would talk to them. I enjoyed and like was appreciative and felt like honored that they wanted to share it with me. But some people aren't comfortable with that. And for some, it helps them like release the trauma by sharing. And other people, it's really heavy and like personal and they don't want to share it. And so that's okay. What I'm talking about here is meant for clients who are comfortable with it. And we by no means should be prying into folks' lives who aren't comfortable sharing. And so I think there's a lot of training that we all have to do with our team members who are directly interfacing with survivors, or for ourselves. I've taken a bunch of classes on working with clients in a trauma-informed way so that you're not using like triggering language to possibly remind them of what they've been through. I haven't had to talk to clients, or not had to, but haven't talked to clients now in a few years, but I do remember like being able to sense when somebody was going to be very uncomfortable having these conversations, and you just like back off and you move on to the next person. And we're demonstrating here this like very human need for our services, right? Like without the stories, we can't demonstrate the need that our fellow neighbors and humans have in a way that funders can see and understand. And so what I have here, there's of course like the head, facts, statistics, data, and dates, and then photos. Photos are a tricky thing and videos are a tricky thing. Some people love the photos and videos. Some will say no, and that's of course like that's all okay. But if you can get a photo of the house of like before and after type work, from the same angle, that's really helpful for funders. I know when you're walking through a house and maybe somebody's living there and it's not in a condition that somebody should be living there, but they have no place else to go. And so they're forced to stay there. It's a tricky thing to start like snapping away photos on your phone. But I think that there's like a conversation that happens before that. You're talking to the homeowner, you're starting to like learn about them and understand their comfort level. And if it feels like you can say, okay, do you mind if I take a few photos here? I just want to be able to show the extent of the damage to our construction team so that we can start like figuring out if we can help you or not. There's ways to approach it. Certainly you should ask them. And I know that I'm saying this, and I know all of you probably know this and do this, but it kind of just, it like wraps into everything. Asking if they're comfortable with it, great. If not, again, like moving on. Okay, and listening and interpreting. I feel like I'm probably preaching to the choir with a lot of this because I have a very good feeling that you all do this already and do it very well, but humor me here. Listening and interpreting. So we should clearly see if the family or individual was impacted by the disaster. We want to see, like if you can find a water line or a watermark on like an exterior wall or an interior wall, that's something that you want to ask them about, maybe take a photo of. every disaster is so unique. Winter Storm Uri had frozen pipes that exploded, and then, you know, obviously damaged a lot of the ceiling and wall area. Whereas like Sandy, it was floodwater rising, and so the water was coming from basements up. So it's all different. I know Ida in some areas was more of a wind event that ripped off roofs, and so then there was water coming in because there was a lack of secure roofing. So it's obviously different everywhere. So know your audience. Know, I mean, not that anybody wouldn't, but know what are appropriate questions to be asking folks. And especially if you have new team members that maybe aren't from the area, make sure that they're like very well versed in the like detail and depth of damage before they're talking to the clients. It's not just enough to know, oh, this is how you talk to clients. These are the things that you should ask for approval. But know your audience, know your people, and be able to have like an educated conversation with them about what happened to them. And that's really important. Remember too that clients have worked really hard, and sometimes this might be their one and only asset. And so now they're faced with this like seemingly impossible task of repairing it. And so we want to really define the challenges that this homeowner has faced to get the home repaired. How do we show the funders that this is this person's like one and only asset? This is how they're going to be able to preserve their equity and their generational wealth is all wrapped up and tied into this. It's not just a house, it's their home, but it's what they pass down to their children. It's what their grandparents pass down to them, and everything, all their equity is tied up here. So what we're doing is not just fixing a roof or fixing a house, it's literally preserving this person's asset and well-being for the next generation. And so tying all of that together, especially for funders, is like a really important way to show bigger impact than just we repair roofs or we repair like storm damaged homes. And then here on the screen here, there's some different things that you would use a client bio and a client story for. We call them client bios, but it's the stories. Major brands and partnerships. If you share it with your internal team, SBP always shares stories with our internal team. We had one that went to an NFL quarterback who used the story to go and find more funding for us, which is really cool. Which actually I think that was Drew Brees after Ida, I think is what that little bubble is mentioning. He ended up, I think he's partnered with Lowe's, and they were able to get a bunch more funding through Lowe's for Ida homes because of the stories that we shared with them. And then it's been shared in the New York Times and like a lot of local papers too. Oh, I see another maybe chat question. Oh, okay, you guys are just chatting with each other, very cool. Asking the right questions, right? So like I said, it's really important to have a deep knowledge of the type of storm and the type of damage. They don't all have to be part of the narrative of the story that you write, but again, it's like weaving in the context of what this home means to the family, who was impacted, what were their lives before, what do they normally do? Like you have to kind of sometimes humanize them a little bit, which sounds really gross, but we meet them, we feel like they're our neighbors and partners, like going through the process with us and kind of like hand in hand. But to a funder who has maybe never been to New Orleans or like South Brooklyn, they don't know. They just like have this image in their mind, and it's our job to be like, nope, Miss Smith has like worked her entire life. She had insurance. She maybe had flood insurance, but not enough flood insurance. And because of the like 10 feet of water that came through her house after Sandy, she was left with a $20,000 gap and lives in a home with mold in her basement. Like it's the whole story of this person maybe did everything right. And even if they didn't, that's not the point. But my example is they did everything right. They bought their home, they had insurance, maybe they had flood insurance, or they received the home in a will, and they did everything they could to protect it. And this still happened to them. And so it could be anybody. We say to at SBP, community is not defined by proximity. Like we are literally all over the country right now on this call, which I think is super cool. But we're a community. Like we've all been talking for the better part of like 5 weeks now and interacting with each other and asking questions and answering questions. It has nothing to do with our proximity. And so it's the same idea. Like how do we get these funders maybe in DC or California or wherever to understand that the people in New Orleans and the people in Florida are just as much a part of their community as their actual neighbors. Talking about immigration, their stories, what the damage was that they experienced from the storm. I think I maybe stole this from a winter storm presentation, so sorry I didn't edit that. Where are they living? And then you kind of get into like the nitty gritty of it and what activities are they looking forward to? Is this somebody who had lots of backyard barbecues? Like, are they looking forward to doing that? To again, like humanize it. Okay, now I'm gonna go to another one. There's like a 2-minute quick video and then there's only one slide and we'll wrap up.
The high winds of Hurricane Laura uprooted an oak tree in 86-year-old Roy's backyard in Sulphur, Louisiana. It crushed the back of his home. Rain poured in, ruining walls, floors, and most of his model airplane collection. This wasn't just any collection. This was handcrafted, made over the span of 17 years on various oil rigs off the coasts of Texas and Louisiana, where Roy served as a driller. During his time offshore, he'd watch the airplanes high overhead, memorizing their details and using scraps and spare wood on the rig to build miniature models of what he'd seen, capturing everything down to the finest details on the wings. He has a photographic memory. The loss of his meticulously crafted models is only one of Roy's losses. The home also held a lifetime of memories of raising his 2 girls. It's where his wife died in 2000. Home was where he retreated when the pandemic hit in early 2020. Like many in the aftermath of Hurricanes Laura and Delta, Roy lost a lot. His home damage made it too unsafe for him to stay, so he moved in with family as he tried to figure out the FEMA processes. Roy can't read or write. His initial award from FEMA didn't come near what was needed to cover his damage. When the inspector came out, he walked around the house and estimated 25% total damage to the home. Roy's niece, Sharon, there to meet him and help Roy with paperwork, urged the inspector to go inside since no one currently lived in the home. COVID-19 precautions prevented that, the inspector explained. His guest estimate stood. Sharon and Roy connected with SBP, and we helped them appeal his initial FEMA award of $14,000, increasing his total award to $34,000. We are also rebuilding Roy's home. Roy is fortunate to have a caring family who advocates and fights for him. Not everyone does, and that's why our work is so important. We help those who are most vulnerable fight for what they deserve to preserve the homes and lives they have built for themselves, their families, and future generations.
Okay, so, oh, what? Every time. Just go to the next slide. Okay, thank you. Again, not saying that every story has to be like that. And that was done by our communications team. They sent out a professional photographer to Roy to speak with him. And he was like very open and willing to share his story. But the idea is she showed his story through a lens of him as your neighbor, him as a friend or a relative. He could be anybody and he could be anywhere. And this happened to him. And so there's so much to it where it's not just telling the story of this person is low to moderate income, they were storm affected, they need our help, they need, $30,000. It's really got to be all wrapped in the story of that person and why helping them means the world to them and to their community. It's not even just them, it's their community, it's their relatives, their friends and family. He had fantastic, I think it was his 2 daughters that helped him, but not everybody has that. And so if not everybody has that, like how can we act in place of them? So to kind of go into some additional resources here, oh my gosh, there's another garbage truck. I'm sorry, I don't know if you can hear it. So this talks about, and I'll send, of course, like the PowerPoint out to everybody after, and I encourage you to check out these links. The first one is just really simple tips for writing basic storytelling tips. And then the second one is how to edit yourself. I know, like, I mean, I can write something and read it 100 times and not notice like a glaring typo in it, which drives me insane. But I feel like it might be similar for others too. We just need a separate set of eyes, or maybe there are some tools for how to edit yourself. Because we tend to work, I think, siloed, a lot of us, and maybe don't have other members of our team who are really well versed in grammar and content. And so this is like a nice article that my colleague found about how to edit yourself. So I will pause and see if we have any questions.
I have a question. It was very timely that this came up today, because I had a discussion with an organization in Louisiana yesterday with some of my ops people, and we had a big, like, just, there's always words now. I mean, it's constantly changing. The words that were said when I was a teenager, obviously, thank God, so different than they are now. But I feel like I'm constantly learning about, in this world and every world, what words are appropriate or offensive and what to say and what not to say. And we had a discussion about using the term vulnerable versus at risk and all of that. And I'm just wondering, like, if there's a resource of like what words are like out now, or what words, like, do you guys use the word vulnerable when you're doing a write-up for a grant? Because we do target communities that would not get the help unless we came in to help. But how do you phrase that? And I feel like that's something we're always trying to tell our stories ethically, but how do you know the right thing all the time? It's hard.
Yes, very good question, Lori. Sorry, I muted myself to just
It's okay.
take some of the background noise out.
Or if anyone else has any feedback, I don't know. I mean, it's,
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the grant writer at SPP, and I can ask her, but I know since I've been with SPP, words like victim were used. I mean, like we would say disaster victims,
yeah,
and only meaning that obviously that they had experienced disaster. And now that's like language that we definitely don't want to be using.
right,
More
exactly.
disaster survivor, or like vulnerable homeowners. But that's the only one that like immediately comes to mind. I'd be curious to know if anybody else here has seen the language shift and could give like specific examples, because I think that's a really interesting question.
I don't know anything specific, Laurie, to what you're talking about. I'm very curious. I mean, I prefer the term vulnerable to at risk. But I also will try to use. I have not experienced grant writing. I'm a sociologist, so I always try to insert words that help to frame the issue as not based on like the individual's fault, but has more to do with systemic and structural failures.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I'll try to, I mean, of course, that's not language that everybody's like comfortable with, or that like necessarily understands what you mean when you use it. But
Yeah.
I do try to make
Well,
clear that if I'm talking about vulnerability, it's not because of someone's life choices. It's because of a systemic failure to that individual in that community.
well, to this person, and I don't necessarily agree with it. I love language. I love writing, and I'm not, gonna write like a novel or something, but I think it's really fascinating. But she said that vulnerable implies that the person doesn't have any control over their situation or strength or fortitude to be able to deal with it on their own, or have skills, and that's a discussion that could probably be over a glass of wine at a dinner, like to talk about these kind of words. But I think it's just interesting. It brought up, because I used that word and so did one of my colleagues. And I was really appreciated her perspective, but it's just interesting, like using the word, like how victim used to be used and now it's survivor, and it's constantly evolving. And when you're telling a story, how do you do it without offending somebody? It seems like it's hard not to offend somebody sometime in this world we live in, but it's hard to balance and do the right thing.
I can do some research and dig around because like I mentioned, I've been lucky enough to attend a lot of trauma informed courses and classes, and I work closely with our development team who writes up and uses a lot of the like newest language. And so let me see if I can find, I have already a few articles in mind that I want to send out that like really talk about this, and I just don't feel like I'm equipped to.
And I sent out an ethical storytelling thing that we had done that's really helpful. Somebody had asked me for it from Rebuilding. I need to jump off. I'm really late for our call, but thank you so much, Angela.
Thanks, Lori. Yeah,
thanks so much. Thanks, everybody.
Other questions?
So this is Ron Peters from Katie Responds in Houston. I just on that term, we've moved away from vulnerable to marginalized. I put it in the chat, but felt like marginalized didn't pose an issue against the family. It was more just where their position was. So anyway, for folks that are interested in that, I think that it's a quality word.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Ron. Yeah, this is great.
Hey, Angela, it's Ben. Oh, sorry.
Hey, Ben, go ahead.
No, sorry, I didn't. If you want to finish what you were saying, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
I have
please.
a question.
Go ahead. What's your question?
It's just a general idea around, it's super helpful to know contextually that you have found success by doing the research beforehand and identifying a need and then going to ask specifically for funding to solve those needs. When it relates to storytelling, like for instance, do you find it's better to have one or two families or cases that you would use as the sort of anchor point, or like how do you balance that need to talk about specific individuals versus saying we have 100 families that we know are all in need, and this is the sum total that we would need to be able to address all of those. I guess, is it better to do like a big ask for a broader group of people and say this is an example of what we're seeing versus you need to do smaller asks that are very targeted based on either a story or an area specific to the same kind of storytelling?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So SBP is very like data driven. Like we like to really quantify everything because I think it clearly encapsulates what the need is, but you have to like pick out one or two stories and make it personal. Like, cause I was talking about like humanizing it, connecting people to communities regardless of their location. And so you have that data of like I had in New York, 150 clients that were completely eligible, could receive services, but we didn't have the money to do it. Have the data, here's the dollar amount, here's the number of clients it will serve. We're gonna do it over 18 months. And then here, let me introduce you to two of those 150 clients, Miss Smith and Miss Jones. And here's a picture of Miss Smith and Miss Jones. Here's the house, like the outside of the house they're living in, the watermark that's 9 years after Sandy still on the house. So you wanna then wrap it up in the specific story of here's a face to the data. And you can pick like one or two, I think is fine. Then you have go crazy with it, but I think you definitely want to show a few clients that are part of that data set because it's not just numbers, it's people. But yeah, good question. Thank you for asking. I know we're like we're definitely over time here. Any other questions before we wrap up our last session? So sad I'm not going to get to see you guys next Thursday. What are we? Yeah, it'll be very upsetting. But any other questions? Okay, well, I have lots of content I want to send out. I have some photos from our construction and client process for Toy. I'm going to try to get some more. I know Lori jumped off, but more information about Toyota's, ability to share this with other nonprofits if there's a charge for that. Some language about storytelling and the language that we use there. And then of course I'll send the download presentation and the recording. So it's been fabulous to get to talk to you all every week. I hope that you guys got a lot out of the workshops and the sessions. And like I mentioned, absolutely keep in touch with each other. And I'm going to probably next week, I'll send out the follow-up for this, but in the next coming weeks, look for ways that we'll all be staying connected. I think it's going to end up being a Google Doc or folder that we all just like drop information in and have all the contact information there. So that's kind of what I'm thinking, but we'll see. So any last thoughts before we close up?
I just had one more request.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry I didn't share it. If you could, if you have any resources for trauma-informed trainings for disaster responders, that'd be awesome.
I do. I have a lot of information, really cool, really great stories and content actually. So yeah, I'll definitely share that. We have like, I feel like somebody wrote up, yeah, I think I have some good stuff on that. Any other content? Greg, it kind of looked like you were going to say something, but I don't know if you meant to.
No, I'm good. Thanks. It's great information. Thanks for bringing us into the group. Talk to you later.
Thank you. All right. Bye, everybody. Good to see you all.
Hi, Angela.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much.